And welcome to the briefing meeting which precedes our July council meeting. I have a number of apologies this morning. Councillor Dempsey, Councillor Barnes and Councillor Honour is joining us via Teams.
Good morning.
G'day Wayne.
Morning.
Yeah, good morning all.
Also we'll talk about any conflicts of interest. Councillor Mitchell has given me a declarable conflict of interest in relation to item G2, and she will be leaving the room while we discuss that. Are there any other conflicts from any councillors?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, G2, I have a declarable interest there in that I have 3 of my family members that work at council, and I'll be leaving the room as well.
Thank you, Councillor Honour. Anybody else? No, that's it? All right, we'll move on then to the first item, which is the MOU with Luganville Municipal Council. Ben, welcome.
Morning CEO, morning councillors and morning gallery. This first item here is a recommendation for the Mayor to be authorised to enter into an MOU with Luganville Municipal Council in Vanuatu. This item would essentially form the basis of a new sister city relationship with Luganville. By way of background, Luganville is the second largest city in Vanuatu behind Port Vila. Council was recently approached by DFAT in partnership with Luganville Council, looking to explore links between our region and Luganville. This is built on the historical links between our region and the Pacific Islands. It also have the potential to strengthen some economic ties between our region and Luganville around agriculture, tourism and port infrastructure, which are featured in Luganville. To govern this new relationship, the Sister City Advisory Committee would be reconvened to sort of administer arrangements, any ongoing arrangements between Luganville and Bundaberg to establish this new sister city relationship. And that's really all the information required behind background to the recommendation. Subject to endorsement of the recommendation, there may be a small civic event later in the month between Luganville and Bundaberg Regional Council to commemorate the 41st anniversary of the independence of Luganville City next week. Vanuatu, sorry, Independence Day. So, thank you. Any questions? Next item is a specialised supply arrangement request. The Council will do a specialised supply arrangement with 3 proponents as part of the Reducing Urban Glow project. The 3 proponents that we're looking to enter into specialised supply arrangements are companies that have worked with Council for the last 2 years on the Reducing Urban Glow project. And they're 3 companies that have worked up specialised IP with Council in terms of hardware, software and smart sensor controls to control the lighting infrastructure that we've installed along the coastline as part of the Reducing Urban Glow project. Those companies are Pendelay Environmental, Schrader Australia and Comlight AS. Have all worked with us over that period to sort of develop unique IP to roll out that new infrastructure and technology to reduce urban glow along our coastline. So the recommendation is that Council does not invite written tenders before working with these 2 companies over the next 2 years to provide services for the maintenance and upkeep of that infrastructure as part of that project going forward.
Financial summary at the 30th of June. Just to note that the figures reported in the accounts are still being finalised with their end of year adjustments. However, the consolidated operating result we don't expect to change at this stage. So the overall operating result for this year is a budget surplus of $9.2 million, which is obviously a significant improvement on our projected $5.3 million budget deficit. The two main drivers of that were the significant revenue streams that have flowed through from the development activity in the area, and also the, I suppose, tourism income that's come through our holiday parks, and also with the airport income. So the two main drivers of the revenue. In terms of the operating expenses, the main driver was, or the variance was the delivery of the non-capital projects. The financial delivery of those projects approximates the capital project delivery. And I'll go into a bit further as to what some of those things are later on. It's probably worth noting that despite that there's an overall improvement in the operating result at the consolidated level, the general fund still at this point remains in deficit for the financial year. So in terms of the recurrent revenue, rates were $1 million more than budget. Two drivers for that. One was that the water consumption was slightly higher given the dry period that we've had. Also, growth was about $500,000 more than what we had forecast, and that was across both the general rates and also some of the utility charges. Fees and charges, as referenced, were about $4 million more than budget for the reasons outlined earlier. Interest revenue was slightly higher than budget, primarily to our cash position being higher than forecast. And grants, subsidies and donations were slightly lower than budget. The main factor for that was that the advance of the financial assistance grant this year was slightly less than what we were expecting. We don't know our allocation yet for the 21-22 financial year. However, we're hoping that if our allocation is the same as last year, the lower amount that we received last year in the advance will come across into this year, so it'd be a positive result for this year's budget. In terms of land, yeah, we had about $2.2 million more in sales than what we had forecast there. Recurrent expenditure, employee costs were slightly lower than budget, as were finance costs and depreciation. As referenced, the largest variance was around materials and services, with about $3.2 million underspent on non-capital projects. The capital projects, we delivered financially $91.3 million worth of works last year. The budget was $118 million. We're currently working through the re-provisions for the projects which weren't completed last year, and those will be presented to Council in August for consideration. Cash at balance date was $147.2 million. That was significantly more than what we had forecast. Two main drivers for that were the revenue streams referenced earlier. Also, many of the capital projects invoices that would have come in late in the financial year may not have been paid out yet. A lot of those are 30-day accounts and would be paid in July, so the cash was still sitting in the bank at balance date. Rates data. Rates outstanding at the end of June were $4.1 million, which was represented by a 2.4% outstanding recovery percentage. Comparable to last year, we had last year, 5.6 million or 3.2%. If you go back a few years pre-COVID, that 2.4% outstanding percentage is the best we've had in BRC's history. So some of the, recovery methods that Council introduced many years ago, I think, are starting to resonate with the community and some success around the recovery there. Borrowings, is highlighting the borrowings at balance date, was $73.2 million. As referenced, I think in the last report, one of the existing loans was paid out during the last quarter. Questions?
Thanks, Simon. Questions, comments? Councillor Cooper.
Yes, Mr. CEO, just to Simon. It is unlike me to talk down a very good, what appears to be a very good result, but am I correct in being cautious towards the numbers that we're seeing today?
But much of the income that has flowed through last year may not be sustainable. Obviously, the land sales, as an example, that particular estate which was successful has now sold out. Obviously, we've got plans in that space, but that may not materialise this year. Similarly, a lot of that fee income that we've got through the holiday parks and development may flow through this year, but it may not. So in formulating the budget for the current year, we were again conservative around some of those estimates. So whilst it was obviously a welcome surprise last year, we can't be sure that that's going to continue through the full.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Simon. I've got some further questions, which I'll go through one by one rather than load you with a lot. First, can you explain the consequences of the underspend, the 24% capital, or 27.1 million? What effect does that have on the future outcomes?
Yeah, so as referenced earlier, those will be considered for reprovision. So those projects that weren't completed last year will continue on, and we'll move those dollars from last year into this year. The forecast has factored that in. It's obviously a bit of a timing issue in terms of it was in last year, but it's now in this year. Relative to the operating result, it has little impact on the operating result this year.
Can you also give me some further clarity on the operating deficit?
The operating budget deficit from last year? Yeah, so that deficit was formulated, or that budget was formulated in April, May, June last year. Obviously a lot of different environment, and management and council were very conservative in their approach then. We obviously didn't know what was to come in the next 12 months. Much of the, I suppose, fee income was revised way down. We didn't budget for land sales. We budgeted for interest revenue to be decreasing further around some of the earning rates. So we were conservative across the board. Similarly, when it comes to expenditure, we were overcautious with some of the expenses that were likely to incur during that period. So
is that simply based on COVID?
A lot of it was based on COVID, yes.
Yep. The other two, I think you've answered fairly well in this sense. Can you explain the further turnaround in the income? I think you did cover that in your preamble fairly well. And what does this result do to the forward budget was the next part of the question.
Yes, so as referenced, forward forecast starts off at a better position, but a lot of the fee income, I suppose, hasn't been factored into the forward forecast. We haven't formulated the budget, handed down in June, factoring in that increase in fee income. So again, it's been conservative budgeting going forward.
Yep. And just finally, am I right in assuming that it's not all smooth sailing? However, it's still a very good turnaround in the result.
Well, it is a good turnaround in the result. Obviously a good platform. As I mentioned earlier, the general fund still is in deficit, so it's still heavily reliant on the other business units, particularly water and sewage, paying dividends across to those units. So despite all, all the positivity this year around the operating result, the general fund is still in deficit and is still not paying, still not generating enough income in that fund to fund the services that the fund delivers.
Thanks for the clarity. That's good.
Before I take further questions, I will just add that, as Simon said, the budget was put together in March, April last year in a period of great uncertainty. And as you note in the report, you'll see that the federal government and the state government both delayed bringing their budgets down to October and December. So we still brought our budget down as usual before the end of the financial year, but that would certainly be the reason why some of those figures are now appear to be a bit conservative, because that was a period of great uncertainty. We weren't sure how long some of those measures were going to be in place. And as we've seen in recent weeks, it can change very quickly again. So
we're in a good place for that, Mr. Zia?
Sorry?
If it changes again, we're in a reasonable place.
Look, I think we are, and I think we've had the benefit of going through some tougher restrictions and lockdowns and regulations. So I think it's always easier the second time. Other questions? Nope. Thanks, Simon. I'll move on to governance. Christine.
Item G1 is about the show holiday nomination for 2022. So each year, Council makes an application to the Industrial Relations nominating show holidays under the Holidays Act. In the past, Council's had 2 show holidays. So the Bundaberg show holiday is the last Thursday in May, and then the Gin Gin show holiday is allocated for People's Day at the Brisbane Exhibition in August each year. Should Council resolve to have 2 show holidays as in previous years, the Childers and Bundaberg show holiday will be observed on Thursday the 26th of May 2022, and for Gin Gin postcode 4671, Monday prior to People's Day for the Brisbane Exhibition, which is Monday the 8th of August 2022. The nomination, and it's expected that all council staff in all service centres will observe the show holiday as Thursday the 26th of May 2022. The next item is G2, which is about the Christmas.
Mr. CEO, I'm going to leave this discussion in relation to this matter due to my family members working at council. You there?
Sorry, Councillor, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yep, I'm just going to put you on mute for this part of the discussion. Once it's over, I'll
Thank
take
you.
you off mute.
So the Christmas closure for 2021. In past years, council's agreed to the closure of council administration offices, service centres and depots for business days over the Christmas New Year period. It's proposed that council offices will close on Monday the 27th of December 2021 and reopen on Tuesday the 4th of January 2022. During this period, employees will take leave. So Monday the 27th is a public holiday, Tuesday the 28th is a public holiday, Wednesday the 29th to Friday the 31st. Employees will be offered alternatives of taking leave, accrued RDOs or toil, or a combination of those, and Monday the 3rd of January is a public holiday. Council will maintain an employee listing of who's available for critical business during that period. G3 is about the operational plan quarter 4. In accordance with the local government regulation, the Chief Executive Officer is required to present a written assessment of Council's progress towards implementing the annual operational plan at regular intervals of not more than 3 months. The quarterly report has been provided for Council, with most areas achieving their set targets, and the assessment is attached to the report for Councillors' information. The next item is item G4, which is the Delegations Register Review. So, by way of background, Section 257 of the Local Government Act allows Council to, by resolution, delegate powers under the Act or other legislation to the Mayor or the CEO. The registers are reviewed annually, or in our case, we review them biannually. In accordance with a material that's provided through the Local Government Association of Queensland. That service is updated by King and Company solicitors during the 2 major parliamentary recesses, summer and winter, where they can be confident that there are no changes to those acts. The delegations to the CEO, the new registers that are added is the Land Regulation 2020, Nature Conservation Animals Regulation 2020, Nature Conservation Plants Regulation 2020. There's repealed legislation for the Nature Conservation Administration Regulation and the Nature Conservation Wildlife Management Regulation. And there has been changes to the Building Act Register, the Land Act Register, Mineral and Energy Resource Common Provisions Act, the Residential Tenancies and Rooming Accommodation Emergency Response for COVID Regulation, Transport Infrastructure Act, and Workers' Compensation and Rehabilitation Act. Those registers and the proposed amendments have previously been provided to you, councillors. There's also proposed amendments to the delegations to the Mayor. So these were previously adopted by Council on the 20th of August 2019 and they're due for review. Some minor changes have been made to the wordings in items 1, 2 and 6 and a previous delegation has been removed as the legislation that it referenced was repealed, and the proposed registers are both presented to councils for adoption.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Christine, I noticed that there's a column there, conditions to which the delegation is subject on the register of delegations. So is that an area where we could have put a condition that council be briefed after any delegation is exercised?
Yes, that's correct. You can add conditions to the delegations that are subject to in that register.
Thank you very much. So I'd just like to advise the meeting that I do forecast an amendment to the recommendation at the ordinary meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Any other questions? Councillor McPhee.
I did have a question for the item before, if that's okay, when this one's finished.
The item, operational plan. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just not fast enough and then we started this one, so.
Fire away.
Now I have to find it. It's in relation to the blue tick that's on, I think it's the local buy policy on page 21. And it has a blue tick which says that the project's come to an end. Is that correct?
Can I just get the number for that?
Under 1.1.4, promoting our region as preferred investment destination, on page 21, as it is in the hub.
1.1.4. Percentage of the total accounts payable suppliers. Yes, blue tick. Council by local average for the year. Yes, so the question was, yes, we currently have met the performance target.
So, doesn't it normally just, like if your meeting is in a green tick, what's the difference between, the blue tick says that the project's come to an end, I think, in the legend. Initiative or project has been completed.
I think that would probably be incorrect because I think that's ongoing because that's an average for the year, so that would be reported back each quarter. Is that correct? Yeah. So that should be a green tick because it will be ongoing. It'll be reported back each quarter.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions then on the delegation review? No? Okay, we'll move on to G5.
Councillors, this is about a specialised supplier for aesthetic and the continuation of aesthetics annual service agreement. Council has currently an annual service agreement with aesthetic for the provision, update and annual service of aesthetic, My Data, Asset My Valuer, aesthetic, SMP, Predictor 5 and Aesthetic Fleet. Entering into this agreement with Aesthetic for 1 year only provides council flexibility to determine what best meets the business requirements for alternative works management and fleet software installations. to be finalised. Other potential suppliers for these functionalities were evaluated in 2018, and Aesthetic was chosen as the supplier following a formal evaluation process. Changing suppliers at this time introduces risks and increased training requirements. For the above mentioned reasons, it's proposed by officers that Council resolve, because of the specialised nature of the services that are sought, that it would be impractical or disadvantageous for Council to invite quotes, tenders at this stage, and this resolution, if made, will provide sufficient time for a review to be undertaken of the future requirements without the risk of interrupting core business activities of Council.
Thanks, Christine. Comments or questions? No, all good.
The next item's G6, which is about the sale of Lot 33 in Heritage Oaks Estate, Childers. So as Council will be aware, we're the freehold owner of the Heritage Oaks Estate, and those lots have previously been offered for sale as they were surplus to Council's need. Council's now received an offer from a buyer to purchase that lot. The offer is for market value, and it's proposed that the exception contained in section 236 of the local government regulation to the disposal of that lot be applied, and that the CEO be authorised to enter into the contract with the buyer and finalise all items required for the sale of that property.
Thanks, Christine. Comments or questions? I'll just notify the councillors that we've actually had fresh valuations for those blocks that Council still holds, given what's happened in the market, just to make sure there's been no movement that we need to be aware of.
Wouldn't the difficult part be there that because there's been very little sale, if anything similar to that, except within the estate itself, you can end up with a false valuation because no one will be able to bring to the market land at that price in Childers anyway?
I wouldn't use the word false, but I am aware that the normal way in which valuations are done does rely on market sales in the same vicinity. So
if you keep them at the same price,
yes,
it's never going to increase.
I take your point.
I just think we should review it.
Well, we can review it, but I'm still going to be bound by what an independent valuer tells the council the blocks are worth, because that's what the requirement is under the Local Government Act. So you can't just arbitrarily pluck a figure out of the air and decide that's what you think it's worth.
So how do you ever get to a situation when it means that estate has to be sold at that price, even though we all know it can't be brought to the market at that price today? You've got to rely on someone else's subdivision somewhere else to sell at a higher price to increase yours.
Well, there's been a number of instances where I suspect land's been sold for prices that you wouldn't be able to bring it to the market to today. It wouldn't be isolated to 5 or 6 blocks in Childers.
Because there is no other similar land available, you can't ever raise the price.
Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the valuations the council gets are currently up to date. People aren't climbing over themselves, Councillor Trevor, to buy these blocks of land. I think we've had 1 sale in 6 months in Childers, maybe 2. So if we were having a run, and I'd then perhaps take your point that we may be selling it below market value, but at the moment, the blocks are still sitting there with independent valuations attached to them.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris.
Is G7, which is a sale of Lot 2 at Buxton Road, Isis River. So Council's the freehold owner of that property, and that was previously offered through tender, which was not successful. And Council had previously resolved to sell that property given that it's surplus to Council's need. Council's now received an offer from a buyer for that property, and it is for market value. And it's proposed again to apply the exception in section 2361AI of the local government regulation, and that the CEO be authorised to enter into the contract of sale with the buyer and attend to all items required to finalise that sale.
Thanks, Chris. Comments or questions? No? All good?
The next item is 01 in Community Environment section. This is for a lease BF, which is to Lake Ibis Proprietary Limited. It's for a lease area out at the Bundaberg Regional Airport. So Lake Ibis entered into a lease with Council for an aviation hangar. back on the 1st of October 2007, with the lease expiring on the 30th of September 2012, and there was an additional 5-year option. The option expired on the 30th of September 2017, and then it was further extended. So it's proposed that the lessee wishes to enter into a new lease to refresh that arrangement, commencing on the 1st of October 2021 for an initial term of 5 years, and then a further 5-year option. Rent will be for market value with annual increases of a fixed 3% amount, and the lessee will be responsible for 100% of their outgoings. It's proposed that Council apply the exception contained in section 2361C3, given that the disposal is for the purposes of renewing a lease to an existing tenant, and that the CEO be authorised to enter into a 5-year lease with a 5-year option for the aviation hangar site BF.
Thanks, Chris. Comments, questions? No, all good.
Item 02 is another lease at the airport. Similar situation. It's a lease to Lang and Robinson. So their lease is due to expire on the 31st of December 2021, and the lessee wishes to enter into a new lease with Council commencing on the 1st of January 2022 for an initial term of 5 years with a 5-year option. Again, rent will be at market value with 3% rental increases per annum. And the tenant is going to be responsible for 100% of their outgoings, and the lease will be on Council's standard airport lease. And again, it's proposed that Council apply the exception in section 236, given that it's a renewal of a lease to an existing tenant, and that the CEO be authorised to enter into a 5-year lease with a 5-year option for the aviation hangar site AF.
Thanks, Christine. Comments or questions? No? All right. That's it for governance. Thank you. Gavin.
I'm dealing with item Q1, which is the 2021-23 Bundaberg Regional Council Surveillance Program for Prohibited Matter and Restricted Matter under the Biosecurity Act 2014. Just a bit of background, Council adopted in 2018 our Biosecurity Plan. It's a 5-year plan taking us up to 2023. The intention with the Biosecurity Plan is a demonstration under the Queensland Biosecurity Act of how Council is dealing with pest, plants and animals and any biosecurity threats in our regional council area. We're required under the Act to undertake a surveillance program, effectively an inspection program, to ensure that the region is managing and landholders are managing biosecurity hazards, so invasive pests and plants, invasive plants and animals. And what's required is that Council has to adopt by resolution the surveillance program. The reason they have to do that is because the surveillance program then provides officers legal rights of entry then to undertake the inspection. So the intention with this recommendation is that we're seeking effectively to have a 2-year surveillance program. The program has to be publicly advertised once it's resolved by Council so that landowners are aware, and as I said, allows officers then to access properties for inspection purposes to identify any potential pest, plant or animal on sites. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Gavin.
Yes, I'd like to make a question there in regard to accessing properties. In the past, Mr. CEO, there has been some people that have been insulted that council officers have come onto their property and identified a weed or an animal and have been concerned that they haven't been contacted. I understand that officers try all means to contact the person that owns the property. If they can't, then this program still allows them to access. Is that correct?
Through the CEO, yes, Councillor Honour, that's correct. The officers do try to, obviously we don't like to just trundle onto properties unannounced. We do try to make contact. One of the difficulties sometimes is that someone might be leasing a property to someone else who is then farming that particular property, and we're not sure exactly who is running it at the time. but certainly the officers try to. In most cases, what they'll try to do is do surveillance from a public space, so a roadway or a road reserve if possible. But if sometimes they might have to enter a property to identify maybe a particular patch of pest plants, then they'll do that, but usually try to notify and take every effort they can to advise the landowner first.
Thanks, Gav.
Yes, I understand this is a state-driven policy, and as council, we are fulfilling an obligation under the state government's legislation, and the process is one that benefits everybody in the region.
Not sure if that was a question, Councillor Honor, but yes, that's certainly the intention. The idea, obviously, with the Biosecurity Act is to ensure and protect Queensland's agricultural industry from the threats potentially of invasive plants and animals.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Honor. Any other questions or comments? No? Thanks, Gav. That concludes the open part of the meeting. We've got one item in confidential in relation to a proposed property purchase. So if I could ask the gallery to vacate, and we'll move on to the confidential item.